Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation.
To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, as always, we've got a real treat. Mr. Jake Thompson is in the house. If you're not familiar, Jake is a leadership performance speaker, two-time published author, and he helps driven people get better results, becoming better leaders worth following. Jake, welcome to the show.
Chris, Dustin, good to see you guys. Glad to be here.
Great to have you.
Good to have you.
Yep.
I cracked your book just recently, one of the two at least, and I am super engaged. Can't wait to get that thing back open. You've got a pretty amazing background in sports, in coaching, and that's a big part of what we're about, especially at least Dustin and I coaching youth sports, and really excited to start the conversation. But your background, tell us about what you do and what's going on in your world.
Yeah, so it's always funny when I get asked that. I say loaded question, right? Brief side, I'm a leadership performance coach. I take on the phrase of chief encouragement officer that I've had since day one, but really work with a lot of leaders at the top of organizations, and then more specifically, their managers and leaders on we say get better results, but more than anything, learning to go against their default. Because we see time and time again what our default reaction is, what our default is never our desired. Like it's never the gut reaction. I'm going to yell at you. We talk about youth sports, right? The parent that screams, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" Like if they had to sit and chew on that for 5 minutes before yelling it, they're like, I probably shouldn't have said that. So we really try to help people take that default, turn it into their desired, because that from a leadership standpoint allows them to get better results for themselves and their team and really develop people. And so most of my work today is as a keynote speaker. We do coaching and consulting for organizations. And then as we were chatting offline, a lot of writing, working on book 3 now, super excited about the journey. The first 2 have taken me on and are still taking me on. And I would say that's really life. How do I just help people show up a little more courageously to do a little bit better to battle their default?
So for someone to write a book, they usually have to have an incredible journey or be incredibly good at something. So I want to know more about the journey to where you are now, because it's a pretty interesting story from the dots that I've been able to put together.
So it's a really interesting thing you said that, right? And here's why before I get into that journey. A lot of my work, keynote speaking, I get the typical, hey, you're the motivational speaker. And as you know, like looking at
Sure, you love that.
I love the idea that I'm like not the motivational speaker you're used to, because all of us conjure up the idea of Chris Farley, Matt Foley, Van Down by the River guy in SNL.
Close to
like
my heart.
that is, and Farley's like, I loved Chris Farley, but like that's what we always imagine. We imagine the guy living in a van down by the river telling you how to chase your dreams and live your life. And so I've always kind of cringed at that. But it's the easiest way to get people to understand, okay, this is a little bit of what he does. He just does it differently. And when I was starting that journey in 2017, 18, I got really stuck on the idea of like, I don't have that wild of a story. Like my story's normal. And everybody says that, like, because you're used to your journey, what you've done, what you've experienced. Well, I haven't gone through that. Yeah, but you've overcome the hardest day you've ever faced. Like there's things to give yourself credit for. And so I always said that. And I said that to the guy I was working with who was training me on speaking. I said, I don't have this crazy story. Like I wasn't homeless. I didn't overcome drug addictions. Like not a billionaire. Like nobody's going to be this crazy inspired. And he looks at me and he smiles and he goes, how many people in your audience do you think were homeless, dealing with drug addictions, had all these other issues? And I was like, probably a pretty small amount. And he's like, oh yeah, tiny. If there's even anybody in the audience that can. He said, but what does everybody in that audience relate to? Struggling in a job. They don't know what they're doing. Trying to raise kids to be better than they were and struggling in today's culture, dealing with a divorce, dealing with a coworker that's like things that you talk about, they can connect with. So you don't have to have this incredible story. to be able to be effective and really good at what you do. And I really stuck with that because I think a lot of times we get caught up in the idea that I have to be so far out there to help somebody. I've got to have this crazy story to be able to make an impact. And really, it's like, how consistently and effectively do you just show up in the small things? And so my journey, goes back. I thought I was going to be Jerry Maguire. I grew up thinking I was going to be a sports agent, got into that industry for a couple of years and found I was just not loving it. The guy I worked for at the time, I wouldn't say was the most ethical sports agent in the industry, and created all sorts of conflict. And so I got out of the industry in 2008, toward the end of 2008, which from a timing standpoint was kind of cool because I was about to graduate with my MBA. From a downside standpoint, we were in the recession. And so I can't get a job at all. I laughed that Best Buy wouldn't hire me for holiday hours because I have non-traditional work experience at the agency, doing promotions for the Dallas Cowboys. I substitute taught for a little while in DFW because I thought I might get into coaching football, which was kind of the love if I didn't want to do an agent. And eventually I just started doing marketing consulting because I had an MBA in sports business and people were like, hey, you're pretty good at that. Can you help my team? And so I would just reach out to companies, say, here's what I'm doing. How can I help you? Built a good consulting practice. I was making, 6 figures, living in Dallas, single, splitting an apartment with my best friend. I think we were paying $400 a month each. Like we were living the life we thought, right? But I was incredibly unfulfilled. I was probably 50 pounds overweight to what I am now. I had a lot of superficial, shallow relationships. I'd gone through a bad breakup in college and just kind of didn't care at that point. I was just like, I'm chasing career, money, like this is what I want. And when I started getting it, I was like, there's got to be more than this. And I read a book by a guy named Donald Miller called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And it's all about the power of story, but specifically is what life you live tells other people what's important and tells a story. And what do we think about great stories? We think movies, books, they have conflict. They have a character who's willing to step into conflict and engage for something bigger than themselves. And they invite others alongside them. And when I read that book, it was like straight evaluating me that I was living a crappy story and I'd built an incredible sandcastle that when I died would be gone and there would be no impact having been here. Like nothing to say, oh, yeah, Jake was here, Jake made a mark, Jake helped me. And so I started exploring this idea of what if I stopped living the way I was and started being intentional with how I showed up to improve. And for me as a former athlete, it started in the gym. I'd go into the gym and just every day, can I do a little more weight? Can I do another rep? Can I play better? Pick up basketball. Can I be a better teammate today? Can I do screens? Like everything was like, where am I getting better? And I started applying it to my work of, can I deliver a better project for a client, even though they paid me the same as last time? Where do I start to improve? And day after day after day, eventually, physically, I started to change, but more than anything, mentally, my confidence changed. How I started showing up in situations changed. And as people would ask me about it, I just kept going back to this. I'm competing with myself. Like it's just me trying to get better. And eventually kind of winding that road, the more I talked about it, the more it was like, hey, I'm just competing every day. And it started to resonate. And I threw it out an idea to friends and they were like, that message is you. Like, I don't know what you're going to do with it, but that's you. And eventually, after trying a lot of things that didn't work, I started selling t-shirts out of the trunk of my car behind a CrossFit gym in Dallas because I thought, why not? And so I threw compete every day on shirts and I was like, this is going to be a fun side hustle. And I'm still going to do my marketing consulting. And then the shirt started to take off and grew. And I had the chance to travel all over the country selling shirts that encouraged people, that motivated people, that kind of challenged you on those days you didn't want to show up and get up and go to the gym. You wanted to hit the snooze button. You didn't want to be present or have to go above and beyond for this. Like you did it. And so we really focused on that. And little by little along the way, I just had opportunities to share that. And having been a just complete learning junkie since I was a kid, and I say that because my mom was a teacher, grandmother, like you can see behind me right here, all the books, you can see a little bit on the shelves, but like I just devour knowledge. And what can I learn? And then what can I learn and what can I share? And so I've always been leadership development, professional development, personal development, got into sports psychology a lot and studying that, and just said, how do I help other people do these things that I wish I'd known at that age? And eventually brought me to here.
Incredible. You know, one of the important things I think that you said early was how people undervalue their own experience. You know, to your point, if it's not this wild story or wild background. I went through a similar process as well. I'd say like when I was finally leading McClone Insurance, the organization I lead today, there was literally a point in my career where one of our other leaders repeated something that I said, some phrase or whatever. And it messed with my head because I was like, wait a second, someone's listening. And it was because I'm a talker by nature. And so all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second, I gotta think about what I'm talking about now because somebody's actually listening. And to your point, it was because in my mind, I just totally undervalued my perspective and my own experience. Because to your point, it's just a little bit every day. And a lot of times you don't have that big story that, you think you can share with people, when in reality, that doesn't mean you can't inspire, motivate, and coach people, right?
Yeah. It's funny you say that for two reasons, right? Anybody that's a parent listening understands that, goes through that exact same thing. When your child picks up a 4-letter word, you're not ready for them to learn from you. Like my best friend's kid learned one from me, and he's like, I get to explain that to my wife now. Thank you. So everybody goes through this idea of people are watching you. The fact though is, like, we talk about this a lot when it comes to confidence and dealing with imposter syndrome, is what's in your carry-on. And I use the idea of a mental carry-on. There's folks that use lockers and file cabinets, but I love the idea of a carry-on as a guy that travels, because your carry-on bag is like, what's my go-to, quick access on a plane, easy to travel with. And for us, the way we pack a mental carry-on is, what are things you've done successfully in the past that you can pull out in moments of need? Like if we talk about a workout, we were training some people that were doing a high rocks race. We said, in the middle of the race, when you have the doubts that I can finish and this is getting really hard, it's helpful to be able to say, oh, in my mental carry-on, you know what? I did a really tough thing at work once. I put in for a promotion I wasn't ready for and found a way to overcome the challenges to do well. I had a really tough conversation with my spouse that I was scared to death to have, but I still sacked up and did it. I played sports. I was an undersized kid. I fought my way on the depth chart. When you can look at those things, regardless of how, quote, normal they feel to you, and just say, I did that hard thing. I can do this. I can walk into a room full of strangers at a networking event and say hi, because somehow I walked across the bar one night and said hi to my now wife that I didn't know. Like, having moments you can reference back to are so helpful in how we show up now, because it's evidence you've done the thing in a different arena. And often we don't do it because we discredit ourselves without realizing what I was saying at the beginning. The worst day you've ever had, you overcame. The hardest situation you've ever faced did not kill you because you're still here. And so knowing that, regardless of how it compares to someone else, should allow you to have a little bit of confidence in how you show up in today's moment.
The thought of the carry-on really resonates with me, because if you're traveling specifically, the things that are in your carry-on are typically pretty important. They're essential. And you carry that with you. You've always got that at your side. I just love that so much.
It's easy. So the easiest way to pack it is literally just write down. I tell people, put it on your phone and notes, but just list things in your career and your relationships, your life, that were hard or difficult that you did and you're proud. Or even if, hey, like, I don't think it's a big deal, but I'm going to write it down. Like, doing that gives you something to reference back to, because actual confidence is built through doing the thing, right? You got to have courage to do the thing. And when we forget it, and when we try something new, we get outside of our comfort zone. If we don't have easy access, right, of those most important memories, those wins, we start to struggle. We're still going to struggle because doing new things requires a little bit of sloppiness and struggle. But when you can reference back of, I did that before, I think I can do it now, you show up differently, because suddenly you go from, I don't know if I can do this, to, I've done it over there. Maybe I can. Let's see what happens. Just entirely impacts how you show up as a leader, the work you do, and honestly in your everyday life.
Yeah, I love that. When I was reading your book, Compete Every Day, one of the things that stood out to me as a former athlete, well, maybe I'm still an athlete, I don't know, that's debatable, was that you have to get out of the mentality of competing against everybody else, and rather you're competing against yourself. And one thing that I've been kind of noodling with recently is that it's just really about getting 1% better. It's about competing against yourself per se, but how do we compete to be 1% better every day? and what is the compounding interest of that after a month, after a quarter, after a year. And when we put together a planner, and this is why this resonates with me so much, is that I always said, like, having this daily planner helps you stack daily victories to get 1% better. And if you win the week, you win the week, right? You win the month, you then win the year. That's what we're after. And all it takes is competing against yourself, getting 1% better. When did that all come about for you? When did you discover that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I grew up undersized kid in Texas playing football, and it was always me versus you because I had to, right? I had to outwork you and outsmart you if I wanted to play because the guys I was up against were more talented. They were bigger, stronger, bigger arms, you name it. And so I always embraced this me versus you. And the problem with that over the long run is it's exhausting for two reasons. One, there's always someone better than you. There's always, no matter how good you are, there's someone better. Mark Cuban, owner of the Mavericks, former owner of the Mavericks, made a lot of money, done a lot of things. There's people richer than him. There's people that have better franchises in basketball. Like, there's always someone. But is he focused on himself? And so for us, like, when you put your worth and happiness of how do I compare to someone else, you're always going to lose because someone's always ahead of you. Someone's also always behind you. And when you do that, you let your ego lead and you become a lot more complacent versus how do I become my best to how do I just be better than that person? And the research backs that. What we see time and time again in studies is that people, all they care about is, am I doing better than my neighbor or friends? Not, am I doing my best? Do I have a nicer car than the people I hang out with? Do I have a little bit nicer house than the other people in my neighborhood? Versus what am I doing to maximize how I'm showing up? And so for me, growing up, that my mentality is me versus you. And I went through a really difficult period in college where I didn't have that direct competition. Growing up in a small town, everybody on the depth chart, everybody like who you just got to be better than. And when I got to school, I didn't have that. And I really struggled, became really depressed because I started to lose my worth and my confidence. At the same time, I'm struggling with school for the first time where I, quote, thought I was smart. And so it just put me into a tailspin. And so as I got older, I was competitive when it came to like video games and things like that. And it was still a me versus you. And honestly, when I started trying to rewrite my story, and it was just like, can I do better today than yesterday? And that really became the obsession for me. It started to go, but it honestly wasn't until I actually started working out at a CrossFit gym, the same one I was selling shirts behind in 2010, where I had my own past victories. Like, what was the weight I lifted last time? What was the score on this workout? Can I beat myself? Can I beat the clock? That whole idea of me versus me. And then the more you pull at it, the more you realize like, you're the only person you control. Like, you have no impact. You can influence other people by what you do, but it's still you. I even think about football, like a wide receiver lined up at the line of scrimmage, like they're competing with the other people, but who's the only person they control? It's themselves. How well do I run the route? How quickly do I get off the break? What's my focus in this moment? How do I respond to things outside of my control? And so there's a huge, huge piece of really embracing this idea that it's me versus me, and my happiness lies in how I show up in the process, not necessarily the outcome, because we don't control outcomes at all. Now, the beauty of this is when you embrace this mindset that it is truly me versus me, then you come into a collaborative space and say the three of us are teammates, right? We're all Dustin, we're all selling insurance right now, right? Well, we can have a healthy competition of who's going to do best this month. Because what that does is that pushes us to a new level that we do far more together than we do alone. It's like you working out in your garage, you're going to have a good workout. You go to a class with some other people, you're probably going to push yourself to a different level than you would by yourself. And so healthy competition with others is that way, but it has to be secondary to understanding my worth, my happiness, my success is me versus me. Because then I go into those spaces. And now, Dustin, you kicked both of our butts this month. That was just it. You crushed us. I can celebrate that. Way to set a high bar. What did you do differently this month? I want to learn from you. I'm not like, man, screw Dustin. Like, I'm going to beat him. He doesn't know. It's like, no, man, way to go. Rising tide raises all ships. What are you doing differently? How can I learn? Because if I get better and you have the right mentality, you're going to be like, oh, I got to do more to stay ahead of Jake. Or I love the fact he's inspiring me to chase a different level. And so that's truly where the me versus me becomes foundational to allow you to step into a collaborative me versus you space and not have my worth and identity is tied up in whether I win or lose. No, my worth and identity is tied up in how great do I show up with what's in my control.
Jake, I love this so much, and it's simple, it's easy. I feel like it's things that most of us listeners can take away. My question, though, is as someone who coaches third grade girls basketball, how do you take this approach? How do you use this for youth sports? Because that's hard. It's a lot harder for kids. When I say you can only control you, they'd look at me like I'm speaking a foreign language.
100%. 100% they do, right? Because they have all sorts of distractions, because they've grown up with this little device here, because they constantly are comparing themselves to everyone else. And so there's a couple of things that we talk about in regards to this. And so much research backs this, right? I'm sure you've talked about on the show before. Fixed mindset, growth mindset, Carol Dweck, famous studies, right? Fixed mindset, I'm born is how I'll always be. I can't change, develop. Feedback is bad. Challenges are bad. Growth mindset is just the belief system that I can grow and get better. I can develop. Feedback helps me improve. And so when it comes to youth, when they study these groups, what's fascinating is, and this is where it's a partnership, and I say it partnership very intentionally between coaches and parents, is because when they studied the groups of kids that were praised for outcome, kids that were praised for points scored, games won, hits, all of that, compared to kids that were solely or primarily praised for effort, coachability, attitude, things within their control. What they saw is not just in one season, but over the course of these kids' school lives, the kids that were praised for the growth mindset, the things in their control, did far better in the long run. Because what happened is the kids that were praised for outcome started to associate their identity and worth with just the outcome, which means on the games we lost, mom or dad don't love me as much as on the games we won. When I go 0 for 4 shooting, they don't love me as much as when I hit the 3-pointer. And where that really gets into problem is later in life when they see themselves as smart, like I did, and you find yourself suddenly going to college and you're like, I never had to study in high school and got A's. I'm smart. All of a sudden, oh my God, I'm failing a class and I don't know how to study. I'm not smart anymore. What's wrong with me? How much of a loot? Like you go through all of that process. And so with kids, I would treat it similar to Jerome Tang is a phenomenal coach right now at Kansas State. I love everything he puts out. The coach before him, and I'm going to completely blank on who it is. I don't think it was Frank Martin, but what they had in their locker room was a hustle scoreboard. And it was all of the things within your control that don't show up on the stat sheet. Did you dive for a loose ball? Did you get the offensive rebound? Like everybody sees rebound. Did you get the offensive rebound, right? Did you throw it off the opponent out of bounds? Did you, when you got pulled from the court, did you cheer or did you sit on the end of the bench? And they gave them points throughout the season for their hustle board, because what they wanted to reinforce is the things within your control influence the things outside of it. Like we don't control how talented another opponent is. We don't control if your girls step on the court and there's 4 6'1" girls on the other side staring at them, right? But we do control how hard we play, how well we listen to coach. Do we allow the ref who may have made a bad call to pull us out of that moment because we're focused on the ref, or are we winning the next moment in the next play? And that's the thing we talk about time and time again with them. In fact, I had a chance to go speak to a college basketball program this past year, or earlier this year, I should say. They were in the middle of a losing streak and the girls team was frustrated and they were kind of checking out on the coach. It was the coach's last season. He's kind of just there. And it was just a bad situation. And I was speaking to the whole student body and the AD was like, hey, will you come talk to the basketball team? Here's the situation. And as a speaker, you're like, oh, what are you walking me into? Like, what's going to happen here? And so I thought about it for a few minutes and I said, cool, I got this. So I told a short story about Tom Brady and while he was at Michigan, this idea of just the 2 plays. And then I told them, I said, hey, listen, every game you've had before, you have no control of. You're in the middle of a losing streak, right? I had losing streaks in football. What I remember, though, are who are the guys that stayed and fought till the end? Who are the guys that weren't going to give up on the season, which meant giving up on your teammates? And man, some of the coolest memories I have were in games that ended that season, even though we got crushed in other games at the beginning of the year. Like I'll still never forget a few moments from later in the year. I said, the only way you do that is just win the next possession. If you hit a great shot, come down the court and say, what am I doing to win defense? If you miss the shot, What am I doing to win defense? If you defender goes by you and gets a bucket, how do I just win the next one on offense? I said, because what happens is we emotionally go up and down, up and down. Oh, I hit a great shot. I'm awesome. Oh, crap, they scored again. And you mentally are exhausting yourself playing this roller coaster versus how do I just stay in this moment? And so we talked about this idea of winning their next, and they wrote it on their shoes. They wrote it on their wristbands. And the coolest part for me was the coach. He's like, whatever. He bought in. And every time they had a timeout, you could tell people get excited. He's like, hey, win the next. And they would tell each other on the court that. Like, it was the coolest experience for me to see. Awesome. But what it was praising you to stay in the moment with what's in your control. Let's forget the outcome. Bill Walsh said it best. You win your championship trophies in practice. You just pick them up on game day. And so the more we praise the process, the more we praise, hey, how do we win this moment? Hey, I saw how you missed that shot. When you went down the court, you didn't let your head drop. I saw you and I'm proud of you. The more we pour that into them, regardless of whether, and here's the tough part, regardless of whether we see the outcome we desire on the court that day, we plant seeds where they're going to understand the importance for life. And at the end of the day, I know coaches, we are judged on wins and losses, and parents get upset about playing time. But at the end of this, all we're doing is trying to set kids up for success in life by empowering them through sports. And that's the hardest thing when you have a parent who's trying to live vicariously and their identity is wrapped up in how well their kid plays, right? Which is a whole other conversation versus how do I just empower my kid, my daughter, with what's in her control to be the best at it and embrace the idea of, hey, listen, I don't expect you to be the best player on the court, but I expect you to be the best player at getting better. And if you can do that for me this year, and I can praise and continually remind you every time you do get better, you're going to be set up for life.
Fuck, that's good. That is so good. So I got to ask, what's the title of the next book? Win the next one?
No, it's not. So I started outlining that book of it, like playing in the moment, and I'll probably come back to it. This new one's called Touch the Line because it's basketball, suicides. There's a tiny gap between touching the line and not. And most people overlook it. It's just an inch. However, just like the first book, it's the small, simple choices done consistently that create impactful. And so I wanted it to be Touch the Line because every athlete has done those drills and every athlete knows what it's like of you're touching the line or you're not touching the line and how most people dismiss it.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
My wife is a youth sports coach, and literally when her girls graduated after 8th grade, because they had this chant, and she said, all right, remember, touch the line, and they would chant back every time. And so literally that was their chant back to her when it was all done. Cause you're exactly right. Like that's the most basic behavior of, are you cutting corners? Or are you going all in?
That's it. And it's funny. There's a really cool story. JJ Redick told, on his podcast. He was interviewing Chris Paul a few years ago, and Chris Paul, they're just talking about stuff. And Chris Paul actually tells a story about JJ. And he says, the one thing I'll never forget about you is when we were all with the Clippers, Doc, we'd had a long week. We're doing practice. And Doc was like, okay, if everybody finishes this sprint in under whatever time, you don't have to do the last 3. Like you get to end practice early. And of course that fires guys up. And so they do it. Everybody makes it. And JJ goes, F this. We're doing all 3 remaining because if we want to win, no cutting corners essentially. And so Chris was like, man, when I saw that, like I was in with you. And so this is that mentality, right? Where are we cutting corners? Because in our society today, you do what's common, you do what's your default. Oh, it's easy. I'm tired. I've been over. You missed the line. Go back and touch it. How do we further help folks? And since I don't get a ton of opportunity to speak to high school and college athletes as I did early in my career, because most of my work now is corporate and association, I wanted to create something that I can empower and encourage them with. And then more than importantly, like I know moms and dads are just like, hey, I want to take some of the stuff you're talking about and give to my kid, but I don't want it to come from me. So how can we do that?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I think about that story, which is amazing. And I think about having a teenage athlete in the house currently, used to be a basketball player, and being around a lot of good AAU athletes who very much will be starting high school basketball players when we're playing college basketball at some level. Most of them despise the drills. Most of them don't want to do the drills, and they get to a point where I don't care if they're a bench player or a starter. They're like, I'm done with that shit. I don't want to do that. And then you have guys like Steph Curry that say, I shoot 1,000 shots a day. And he's working on dribbling. He's doing the drills with the tennis ball and the regular ball. And everything like Kobe talked about and Steph talks about. I don't know about Jordan anymore, but they talk about the fundamentals, mastering the fundamentals. But why is it that it's so hard to get kids engaged with doing those little things?
Here's a fun
even
fact.
Touching the line, like you said,
here's the funny part about it for our listeners. Why is it so hard for adults to do the same thing when we get bored of it in our business? We do, right? I talk to business owners all the time, and it's like, I don't want to do that stuff. Like I did that when I started my career early, but like I'm too advanced for that. It's too basic to do a follow-up call or to prospect. Like a handwritten card, like it's too basic. We do the same thing as adults because we constantly chase excitement over excellence. And the problem with that is the new feels really good, but it's the repetition that makes you great. If you guys haven't had on the show, I highly recommend Alan Stein Jr. His whole book, Raise Your Game, talks about his interaction with Kobe and what Kobe told him. And so would love to introduce you because I don't want to steal Alan's story, but it speaks heavily to this. It speaks heavily to this. And Alan did work in youth basketball for a long time. But one of the stories I love is Peyton Manning used the same footwork and warm-up drill every day from his freshman year of college at Tennessee all the way through his 18-year NFL career. Same drill. And he would all out. He showed video footage of him in college, him in the pros doing it, and he's full effort every time. Why? Because you've got to be instinctual. As an athlete, like just because you've done it and you've done it a lot doesn't mean it's your first instinct or your new default, right? It's not that desired first step. And when the pressure's on and when the game is on, the last thing you want to be thinking of is what's the move I make when the ball gets in my hand? You just need your body to react. And the only way you get to that point is through the repetition. AJ Hawk, who played for the Green Bay Packers, talked about this of doing the same footwork drill over and over and over again. It was boring. But he talked about the importance of their coaches drilled into them doing the same drop back is because 1/10 of a second in your reaction time could mean the difference between you making a play and them making a play. And the only way you bridge that 1/10 of a second is if you immediately know what to do as soon as you see that ball go a certain way. And so athletes, just like adults, we get bored, which is why people who want to be great are very good at being bored. Because it's all about, I don't need the excitement to fulfill me because the work is going to create the growth that will. And so Steph Curry's point, like how many hundreds of thousands of shots, and I have it on my other computer because I'm writing about it in this new book, Touch the Line. And there was a clip, Tony Robbins was breaking down a bunch of this, but like say Steph has shot 2.5 million times over the course of the last 20 years. How many of those have actually been in a game? Tiny percentage. But that's why he's one of the best shooters. It's not, he's just naturally gifted. He's got 2.5 million good reps on you because repetition, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And so the athletes that do that, and I say this because in high school, like some of my more talented players were some of the lazier ones. And it always frustrated me because I looked at him and it was like, God, if I had your size and talent, like what is wrong with, like, you're wasting it. But I realize it's the same with life. Like the pyramid, the higher you go, the more you climb, the less crowded it becomes. And so as athletes, you're either going to suffer on the front end of doing the work, quote, to do the boring, or you're going to suffer on the back end in a game when you can't make the play when it matters. And you have to decide now, which is a hard decision when you're 13, much less when you're 40. And so the kids that do it just understand, like, it's not about what's exciting. It's about what's going to make me better and give me the edge. And there's a book about Kobe. It's actually outside. It talks about his high school career and how he just did the drills and would work over and over and over and over again on this stuff. And it was fascinating. He just never stopped looking for, how do I improve? And I think that's where you have to over communicate with the athletes of, like, The more times you do it correctly, the faster you get at it. And you want to make sure when your career is over, you never lost a game by one. Like in basketball, because why? You lose a game by one, you can always think back to what's a play I should have made that I didn't, or where in practice or the offseason should I push myself harder and would have made a difference. That will eat you alive.
Fantastic. So one of the things is you've talked about the me versus me. I'm curious, how do you tie that to this concept of, you are who you surround yourself with, right? This concept of, the top 5 people around you, change your circle, change your life. Just curious on how you kind of tie those two together.
Yeah. So actually really easily, like we talked about early in the show. So in the Compete Everyday book, we call it your starting lineup, right? Basketball, you got 5 on the court. Jim Rohn's old quote, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. No real science around that, but it's a really good, healthy number when you think about social circles. The one I love is Dr. David McClellan from Harvard estimates that 95% of your success and failure can be attributed to the people you habitually associate with. The people you hang out with are going to take you from your own goal line all the way down to the 5-yard line. You just have to punch it in. So when you think about that, if you're intentional with who you surround yourself with, and there are other people who are also me versus me, then you're all going to grow and get better because each person's growth inspires the other to do things. I've got one of my really good friends is in benefit sales. And every time we talk, we're talking about, hey, what'd you do? How you doing this? Like his wins inspire me to where I want to celebrate him. And what you find is people that are me versus you will not cheer for your wins. They will. They'll kind of give you the golf clap, as we say, right? Oh, politely. Oh, that was good. Good. You got a promotion. But what happens? We feel envious because we didn't get the promotion, or like we feel like we deserve as much as you do because we know you, like whatever the case may be. But a real friend is the kind of person who's going to slam their hand on a table screaming for you because your wins do not diminish their own. What they do is actually inspire them to keep raising their game. And so the problem is, when we're kids growing up, we tend to hang out who are our teammates, who lives in our neighborhood, who's around us. As we get older, we tend to do the same thing and we lack the intentionality to be like, I should really spend more time with that person. That's one of the things my wife and I love to do is like we go through every quarter of like, who's someone we didn't really spend much time or any time with this quarter that are one of those couples that enrich us. Like we need to go spend more time with those type of people. And that's really important, especially early in our marriage. We're like, who has a really good marriage we just need to learn from and spend time around? Not that we're in competition with them, but I need to be around other high achievers because high achievers expect one thing. If you're going to hang out with them, you better be a high achiever too. You better be striving for it because if not, they're going to get rid of you. They're not going to hang out with you. And so it forces you to level up. And so when it comes to relationships, intentionality, especially as adults, is severely lacking. Yet we wonder why we don't have a lot of the results we want. If you're in a leadership position or you're a small business owner and you don't hang out with any other people that are in leadership or small business, you're going to have a hard time getting wise counsel. You're going to have a hard time people challenging you on where to grow. If you're a parent of a youth athlete and you're not hanging out with other ambitious, driven type parents of youth athletes whose identity is not wrapped up in how many points their kids scored, you're going to have a hard time navigating some of that scene because it's already a really tough waters to swim in. And so we have to be super, super intentional because they're going to influence not only our perspective, but our accountability for ourselves to keep competing with ourselves when we happen to get off track.
So let's go down that rabbit hole for a moment.
Sure.
And let's talk about parenting with athletes. And most of us are not you. We're not motivational speakers. We haven't written books on the mindset and things like that. So what are some things that a parent can do to make sure that, these young athletes, these students, whether they be, grade school, high school, whatever, college even, that they can see things like that? Like, I do want to surround myself with winners and not necessarily the starting quarterback or, the wealthiest kid on the team, but how do you coach your kids to make some of those decisions, to spot those things for themselves so that they can teach themselves too along the way?
Yeah, so I'm going to preface this as a guy who is a dog dad only. However, having done a lot of research on this and We even a handful of years ago, I did like 35 episodes for a youth sports podcast called Raising Competitors. I haven't done an episode in a couple of years, but I wanted to have these conversations for this very reason, and just to say, hey, here's some additional stuff from people who are parents or sports psych. So on this end, there's a couple of things, right? We know the most important part of a kid's experience playing sports is the ride home. It's the ride to and the ride home. And so utilizing that time to ask questions from a sports experience is really important. Now, if we know that that alone time is the most important, that most of us as parents are just, we butcher. Like generally overall, we butcher that because we want to talk about the points. We want to talk about where the coach messed up. We want to punt out all the things that the kid probably already knows and is frustrated by, versus creating the space and asking questions. When it comes to relationships and who they hang out with, it's probably a lot of the same process. It's just planting seeds by asking questions. Because if I remember being a kid, when my parents were like, you don't need to hang out with them, you don't know them, we don't like what they're doing, that makes me kind of want to rebel a little bit more. Versus if you're asking me, hey, what do you like about hanging out with this person? Hey, I saw you hung out with this group. I'm just curious. Do they have the traits or outcomes that you yourself want in a few years? And what we do in that process is we force them to have to evaluate it. And understanding this as a parent, when you ask questions, more than anything, you're planting seeds, just like everything else. And you may not see the harvest immediately. Because I see this all the time in the work I do in an adult setting, as well as when I have conversations with parents. I'll say something on podcast, I'll post something on social, and somebody will shoot me a DM and like, I showed my kid this. They loved it. He said, the funny part is I've been telling them this for 2 years. And I'm like, yeah, because your mom, like they're used to hearing you. And when someone that's not you, that has somewhat of a little bit of authority or influence on the outside says the same thing, they see it in a different light. Why? Because it's no different than why we discredit our own story. We're used to it. It's normal. It's just mom. It's just dad. I'm used to hearing it. Somebody else says it's the same thing. And so the more we can ask questions, the more we can plant seeds for them to chew on. Second, we have to understand is what was it like for us as a kid? Like, where do we get off track? And how can what would I have done differently? Like, why did I rebel? What were things that I did? Why did I do them? What are questions I can ask for my kid or to my kid to encourage them? How can I understand where they're wanting to go, their goals? Your kid wants to play D1 basketball. Awesome. What are we doing this offseason to get better? We naturally are going to grow and improve. We're not naturally going to get really good as a basketball player. You may grow physically, but we got to train. So what are we doing? And here's a question. Are the people you're hanging out with helping support you get to this goal or not? And one of the best ones I'll ask is the one we just got to. Hey, the girls you hang out with, do you think they're really happy for you when you have a good game or you do really well on a test?
Good question.
Or do you sense there's a little bit of hesitation? And I'm not saying anything's wrong with them, but I'm just curious because I just want you to know, like your circle, yeah, they should challenge you if you slip below the standard, if you mess up and you don't own it. They should call you out, but more than anything, they should always encourage you. And that's why, like in the Compete Everyday book and in a version in this new one, I was like, you got to avoid excuse makers. You got to avoid the envious ones who get jealous of it. And you got to avoid the people that always tell you yes. Because in the short term, it feels really good, but you pay the price in the long term because they only tell you what you want to hear and not what's going to help you get better. At the end of the day, you can only feel good for so long until you get a sack of 0 outcomes that you want. And then you're going to wonder, what could I have done differently? And so with that, always going back to the kid, it's no different for anyone listening of managing a team. The better you get at asking questions versus giving direction, the better they can learn and start to grasp some of those processes.
Yeah, that's deep. That's profound there. And I think about as a parent, when you have that conversation, as I feel like I may have had already, you start to eliminate those people. And even as an adult, we've looked at our circle, my wife and I, and it's like, shit, that could be 75% of your circle, give or take. And for the people out there that you're listening and that strikes a chord, it's hard. But you know what? It's not hard to make new friends either. It's not hard to merge your circle with some new people. and create a whole new circle. And I just think that's what's so interesting.
And that's to your point. It's not hard. We tend to overcomplicate it, but like, where are other people that want to hustle, that want to grow, that want to get better? Where do they go? Probably go to some conferences. There's different events in your area. Cool. What if instead of going to the beach 3 times this year, we take one of those weekends and we go to this conference, this leadership event. We just connect. We go to this youth sports event and learn. Like, where are we going to hang out with other people that are like-minded, that are so important? And the last I'll say is as your kid is making those moves, just being supportive in that process. As you know, one of my friends, she's an Olympian, and her kid's a pretty good high school basketball player, and may get some D1 opportunities, right? Maybe kind of a 1AA, but he's a good high school basketball player in North Texas. And he just made the decision, like, I know a bunch of my high school friends and teammates drink, but like, I don't want to. I need every advantage I can playing ball. And so I'm not going to. And I'm going to go to these parties and I'm going to hang out, but he's like, told his mom, like, I'm just letting you know, like, you don't have to worry about me doing this, because my goals are really important to me. The wild part is, some parents of people he used to hang out with, obviously you'll learn why he doesn't anymore, kind of made fun of him. Like, why don't you have fun? Mm-hmm. You're in high school, be a kid, be cool. Obviously the parents trying to be cool and accepted in the crowd. But he had to understand, okay, if you're doing this and your kid acts the same way, your kid's going to be the same person. Like, I need to separate myself because you're not celebrating and supporting me. And the parent, that's a whole other discussion that we got into, but that's where he started to see, okay, if this is the acceptable behavior and you're okay with it versus not standing up for me, I need to find some new areas to hang out. And so then the mom could just be super supportive in that process, because she knows it's hard to say bye to friendships. And in that case, it's probably a little more severe. Whereas adults, like, instead of hanging out every week, hang out once a month and then once a quarter. You kind of let the slow fade happen. And it happens as adults because we're all busy, especially when we get youth sports going on 5 nights a week, if not 7. But what you can do is intentionally start to fill that space of, hey, on Saturday mornings, I play golf, and guys I play golf with just get trashed every Saturday and talk about how much they hate dealing with their wife and their kids. I don't really think that's beneficial. I still want to play golf. So maybe I see them once a quarter and I just get a different tee time with somebody new, somebody whose kid's playing on my team, somebody, all of that, to where I can replace those relationships over time.
I'll tell you what, though, if you have someone like that in your ecosystem and they're not maybe necessarily dogging them or saying negative things, but they're not supportive, it's actually quite easy to say, you know what, because I've been on the other end of that. It's like, no, we're good.
Yeah,
we're good. And you start to see things differently when you have a competitive, son or daughter that plays sports, either side of the coin. Jake, this is a conversation we could have for 3 or 4 hours. I wish we could extend the conversation, but let's wrap this up. And before we let you go, can you tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your book, how to connect with you online?
Yeah, easiest place to find all things us is competeeveryday.com. Go there, you'll find links out for the books, some of our merch, all of that kind of stuff. And then if you are listening, you're a business leader, owner, you want to learn more about the speaking and coaching work we do, jakeathompson.com is my website. And then as these guys know, I'm really most active on Instagram and LinkedIn, and you'll find me at Jake Thompson Speaks.
Lots of good stuff online, folks. You heard it. If you're in sports, you got kids in sports, get a copy of the book. It is well worth it. Highly reviewed. Jake, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. For all the listeners out there, thank you for listening to another episode. If you haven't already, do us a massive favor. Leave us a review. It only takes a second. And we'll see you next time. Peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.